This video is made possible by my patrons on Patreon. Hello everyone, my name is Xiomaro and welcome back to the channel. So today I want to do a kind of general gaming culture thing. So while I'll be making references to the games that I play, honestly it can be applied to a lot of different games. So what do I mean by meta cucks? Obviously, that's just a silly expression. You might have heard people referred to as meta slaves or something else like that too. I've talked a bit about metagaming before and how the term meta is often misused, but then again, I've also talked about how language changes over time, so the meaning has kind of shifted. Particularly when we're talking about team games with multiple characters, heroes, champions, or whatever your game calls them. Strictly speaking, metagaming is just using out-of-game information to inform in-game decisions. A good example of that would be if you know the enemy team has a player who one-tricks a certain character, you would pick something that counters that character. Not all games will even let you see the enemy team's name before the game starts to prevent that kind of thing. You'll also hear about metagaming in tabletop RPGs as well, where you as the player might know something like, oh yeah, that's an adult black dragon, but your character doesn't know that, so you would have to play it as such. That's another example of metagaming. But there's kind of a new definition for metagaming as well. When we talk about meta heroes, meta comps, or anything like that, what we basically mean is, well, tier lists. Things that are strong or highly favoured in the meta. So it does kind of loop back into the quote-unquote proper definition, using out-of-game information to inform in-game decisions. Say, for example, in Overwatch, when Brigitte was OP as hell, it forced Tracer out of the meta. Brig countered Tracer really hard, so when you know it's likely the enemy team will have a Brig, you probably should avoid Tracer. But see, that's the line where the problems start. Using that same example, what if the enemy team didn't have a Brig? Well, then by all means play Tracer. But this is the part where the meta cucks step in and say, but Tracer isn't viable, she's not in the meta. But they might fail to understand why Tracer wasn't viable in certain situations. So that brings me to my first point, prescriptivism versus descriptivism. I've talked about this before when I explained why Battlerite isn't a MOBA. But Zio, it's multiplayer, it's online, and it's a battle arena, so surely it must be a MOBA. I'm not going to get into that whole thing again, but the conclusion was basically the term MOBA was created by Riot Games so people wouldn't refer to League of Legends as a DOTA-like game. It's not good for business when the genre is named after a competitor. So the term MOBA was born. So MOBA and DOTA-like mean the same thing. Battlerite might fit the MOBA acronym, but it's certainly not a DOTA-like game. There are no creeps, there are no towers, and most importantly, the aim of the game is to eliminate the enemy team, not destroy the nexus. So essentially, prescriptivism is when you tell people how things should be rather than just observe it. So in the example I just used, a prescriptivist would say, well, Battlerite fits the MOBA acronym, therefore it is a MOBA. On the other hand, you have descriptivism, which is more observant. A prescriptivist would observe how people are using a word. So I guess you could argue, if enough people call Battlerite a MOBA, the term MOBA will start to include games like Battlerite and Smash Bros. Because hey, Smash Bros is also multiplayer online in a battle arena. So what the hell does this have to do with metagaming? Well, the difference between someone who understands and uses the meta to their advantage and someone who just reads a tier list and tells people how and what to play is the exact same thing as the MOBA argument. If you predict what someone is going to play and pick a counter, that's great metagaming. If you refuse to play, and in most cases refuse to even let your teammates play a champion because it's quote-unquote out of the meta, without fully understanding why, you, sir, are a meta cuck. And that brings us nicely to the why. Basically, people just have an incomplete understanding of things. Honestly, I don't blame people for that. Not everyone has time to get to know a game inside and out. For a lot of people, it's easier to just go online and find which items the pros are using in Dota, or which heroes the Overwatch League teams are playing, and in a lot of cases, it'll probably do you well. Or at least, it's better than going in totally blind. The problem is, what's meta at a pro level doesn't always transfer to, say, Silver League. A champion might be meta, but requires a lot of skill, for example. Or an item build might only work with a particular team comp or playstyle. And if you're missing that information and just following guides because it's what the pros do, you can see how someone could become a meta cuck. Overwatch, for example, had the whole GOATS comp thing for a while, and it's still there rare, to be honest, and it's crazy how many people didn't fully understand how the comp worked. I won't get into the details, but people seem to think that any 3 tanks and any 3 supports made GOAT's comp. And it was the same with the short-lived double support comps in Battlerite too. It would have been more accurate to have called that comp weaken stacking or something like that. It required 2 particular supports who had weaken effects, and a melee champion who also had a weaken effect to basically turn the enemy's attacks into wet noodles. Simply pumping heals into any old melee champion just didn't cut it. Metagaming is way more complex than just playing what the pros play. Sometimes you can play stuff that top players wouldn't dream of playing and totally stomp low-ranked players. You know the characters people call pub stompers? Yeah, those. So actually at low ranks, pub stomper characters are the meta. If you want to win, and you're happy to use that juicy out-of-game information to inform those in-game decisions, play pub stomper champions. That's the meta at your rank. So how do we stop meta cucks? Well, honestly, if you come across one, there's probably no point reasoning with them. If you're confident with your off-meta pick, the best thing you can say is just trust me. They probably won't trust you, and they'll probably blame you if things go wrong that are outside of your control, but yeah, you're probably not going to win them round to your way of thinking in the span of a 15 to 45 minute game. And actually, if you start an argument while playing, you're just going to make things worse. The best thing you can do is just keep quiet, give it your all, and be as cooperative as possible. And if that doesn't work, what are you going to do? On the other hand, if you can kind of see yourself in my description of meta cucks, if you often tell people what to play because it's meta, maybe just take a bit of time to understand why something is meta. Have a good dig around Reddit and public forums and see if you can get to the bottom of why something is meta. Get a few different opinions and try to form your own ones, because think of it this way, how does something become meta in the first place? If you're thinking it happens when something gets buffed or nerfed, well, honestly, yeah, sometimes. But actually, meta is just a matter of opinion. Sorry, I've used that joke before. But seriously, sometimes something becomes meta when someone figures out a new playstyle, synergy, or counter to an existing strategy. And that can happen with no buffs or nerfs at all. I'm sure you guys can give me some good examples of that down in the comments. That tier list timeline from Smash Bros. Melee always comes up when you mention this because it's an excellent example. There were no patches in this period, but look how much the meta shifted year to year. So, final thoughts. Have you ever heard the old expression, a little knowledge is a dangerous thing? That's the ridiculous state of metagaming and tier lists in modern games all over. The whole discussion is just rife with misunderstandings and prescriptive thinking. Hell, I almost guarantee I've made some horrendously wrong statements even in my own examples because of my misunderstandings. But you know what? Being able to admit that you don't know it all is the first step towards becoming a better teammate, player, and even a better person. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, then please feel free to subscribe for more gaming guides, news, and meta cuckery. And don't forget to check out the links below to my Patreon, Discord, and Twitch. Until next time, thank you for watching, and I'll see you soon.